on avait organisé les jeux il y a 6 ans, on avait un package de coupons. Donc, tu arrivais, tu avais quelqu'un qui t'accompagnait, puis tu assistais juste à des cas, puis tu avais les CV, puis tu savais en live présentait quoi.
Quand j'ai fait les jeux, c'était sur le
C'était vraiment cool. Quelle année?
JDC 2015, c'était le
J'ai organisé les jeux en 2013. C'était ici à
j'aurais aimé ça faire le sport en fait. Je les ai fait quand j'étais au JDC, dans les belles années. Puis à un moment donné, quand c'était pas la journée que je faisais la compétition, la veille, j'avais fait une game juste pour le piscine. J'ai eu une game. C'est fun.
Bonjour.
Bonjour Félicia. Bonjour, ça va?
Jules, plaisir.
Bonjour, Zachary.
Jules,
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Félicia.
Enchanté.
Merci.
Antoinette.
Bonjour et bienvenue au cas de stratégie. Pouvez-vous confirmer votre lettre D? Oui. Est-ce que vous préférez la lecture des règlements en anglais ou en français? En anglais. En anglais? Dans quelle langue? En anglais. For this event, you will have 24 minutes to present your case to the judges. The first 12 minutes of the presentations are considered protected. Therefore, the judges cannot interrupt you. During the next 10 minutes, the judges have the opportunity to interrupt the presentation to ask questions of clarification on the topic being presented at that time. The judges will be limited to 15 seconds to ask a question for a maximum of 1 question per slide. The jury is reminded that they may not ask questions on a topic that has already been covered or that has not yet been presented. These questions must be addressed during the question period at the end of the presentation. The last 2 minutes of the presentation are used to conclude the presentation and are free from questions from the judges. If your presentation is less than 20 minutes long, a penalty of 1 point will be deducted for every 30 seconds. If your presentation is less than 12 minutes long, your team will be awarded a score of 0 overall for that presentation. After 24 minutes, if you have not completed your presentation, you will be stopped to proceed to the question period. At the end of the presentation, the judges will have a question period of maximum of 5 minutes. I remind the jury that it's mandatory to ask a question during this period. If, at the end of the 5 minutes, you have not finished answering the questions, you will be stopped. During the presentation, I will indicate the time remaining when 12 minutes, 7 minutes, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds will be left with a card, and the last 10 seconds with my fingers. A clock will also show you the remaining presentation time continuously. The judges will be notified of the start and the end of the unprotected period by means of a bell. I remind you that under no circumstances may you mention the origin of your university, otherwise you will be penalized. I also remind the audience that it is strictly prohibited to use any electronic device during the presentation, and you are requested to remain silent until the very end of the question period. Before we begin, I'm going to ask the room to turn off your cell phones and put them on silent mode so as not to interrupt the presentations. I will now ask the judges to introduce themselves, and then you can begin your presentation.
Hi, my name is Stratégie. I'm from Bell, and I'm in charge of the recruitment for Quebec, for the new grads and for the internship.
Simon Lapointe, HR Consultant for Corporate Groups at Bell Canada.
Antoinette Morbito, Senior Manager for Customer Experience Strategies, Bell Canada.
Hi, I'm Felicia Galipo. I'm Regional Sales Manager for Quebec at L'Oréal Canada for L'Oréal Luxe.
Jules Rechimbal, Strategy Manager, Accenture.
Luc Bélanger-Martin, HEC Montréal.
Oscar Carrière, Senior Director of Distribution for Montreal.
Bell, vous êtes un leader dans l'industrie des télécommunications depuis 1880. Parce parce que vous avez toujours tenu à votre vision de connecter le monde. Mais on est ici, ce tôt matin dimanche, pour vous montrer que vous pouvez faire plus que connecter le monde, mais aussi supporter l'économie canadienne. Bon matin, je m'appelle Sandrine, et je suis accompagnée par mes collègues Isabella et Zachary, et ensemble, nous sommes Rose Consulting. Parce que nous sommes ici pour aider Bell à fleurir, même à travers les hivers canadiens. Pour le restant de la présentation, je vais continuer en anglais, mais je vous encourage à nous demander des questions, soit en français ou en anglais, parce que nous sommes tous bilingues. So why are we here today? We're here to propose Bell a strategic plan to take advantage of the rise and the need of cybersecurity within small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada. And we achieve this by answering 3 key questions. Now, first off, why go into cybersecurity? Secondly, which sector is actually the most prominent right now within the cybersecurity sector? And lastly, where should Bell actually implement this strategic plan? And with that, I'm extremely excited to bring to you today our Bell 2022 vision, which looks to launch a tailored cybersecurity service to small and medium-sized enterprises across Ontario to really leverage the rise of the cybersecurity needs across this market. And we achieve this by looking into 3 key prongs. The first being plan phase, where we're really looking into actually developing these tailored cybersecurity services and offering them to these businesses. Secondly, we're looking into actually expanding the current team. Because as we know, we're going into a different segment. We will leverage the current team because we know it's very strong. But we'll look into hiring other key employees, which we'll expand on in the implementation. And lastly, the harvest phase. We're really looking into actually offering the services and really marketing the software to these new businesses. And with that, we actually look into other potential expansion opportunities. Now with that, I'll leave off to my colleague Zachary to start off the analysis.
Thank you, Sandrine. So, we want to first off take a step back and take a look at Bell as a whole, because this is a very specific segment for Bell, but we want to see how the SME's cybersecurity business actually fits with your overall portfolio. So looking at your current revenue split, the bulk of your revenues come from your wireline and wireless segments, which are also both the most profitable for Bell. What we see is that in the past years, more specifically over the 2017-2018 period, 66% of the absolute growth that Bell saw came from its wireless segment. Now this has several causes, which will be expanded later on during the analysis, but essentially several of the traditional products that Bell offers, such as home broadband, home phones, entertainment, cable TV, well, they're seeing a lot of hurdles in terms of retaining and growing their customer base due to over-the-top services, which simply use wireless and internet to provide these services directly to consumers, such as Netflix, which provides entertainment, completely bypassing the cable ecosystem. And so we need to keep this in mind moving forward, and this also requires Bell to further diversify its business and to find new revenue streams to replace these aging products. And this is why cybersecurity and B2B services, specifically for SMEs, are very relevant for Bell. So looking at what Bell actually does with all this cash flow that it produces, due to its strong position in Canada. Well, a significant portion of it is actually reinvested within the business, about $4 billion annually actually, and another significant portion is distributed to shareholders. Now this is very significant because this means that Bell is essentially seen as a dividend-paying stock, and so profitability is really a core focus for most of its business units. And so we want to keep this in mind when we start putting in place this new business unit to service SMEs within the cybersecurity market. I'll now pass it off to Sandrine, who will keep on with the analysis.
Thank you, Zachary. So let's look at what you've done so well in the past and why you've become a leader in this industry. Well, first off, as I mentioned, you've had this vision to really connect with people. And on top of that, we've outlined 2 of your really main core competencies. The first one being your bargaining power. So you have actually had a track record of successfully closing a lot of sales within the last over a century of time. So this is something that you're able to leverage moving forward. On top of that, you also have a current infrastructure in place that spans across all of Canada. So if you're looking into deviating into different segments, you can actually leverage this infrastructure instead of actually incurring a huge upfront cost, and instead leverage these infrastructures, which you have done since you are currently in big companies looking, so you're in big companies for cybersecurity, and now you're looking to leveraging this towards small and medium-sized enterprises. But why exactly pursue cybersecurity? Well, consumer demand within telecommunication is varied. There's a very high demand, and with that, there's a very high churn rate. But the main issue that we see is that the government actually places price ceilings on these telecommunications softwares, so you're not actually able to make that much profit moving forward. So although you become a leader in this, it might not be feasible to continue in this segment moving forward and maybe actually divest into something different while also maintaining your current business model. So what does the industry actually look like in 5 years? So we know, as I'm sure you've heard, 5G is coming, it's imminent, it's going to happen any time now. So with that, there's going to be even more of a demand for this cybersecurity. And really want to ensure that you are the leader in this by the time that 5G is really prominent and the increase in data that comes with this. So with this, you see that the Canadian government is actually investing $15 billion in 2019, which is quite significant. So you can see that this is happening very soon. And secondly, how Bell will be impacted? Well, as my colleague Zachary mentioned, your wireline segment, which has been your main source of revenue for many years, has been experiencing a decline. And wireless is on the rise, so this is something that we want to leverage moving forward. But on top of that, we want to deviate into another segment that we see a lot of potential, such as cybersecurity. So, as I mentioned, cybersecurity is a growing need as new technologies may be implemented. Now, we've looked into the 4 key sectors that will be impacted by, or that will be most impacted by the need for cybersecurity, which have been outlined below. Now, for you, I would like to just show you why we're not going into each of the 3 and why specifically professional services. Well, healthcare, TELUS is already leading this segment, so we don't see it as feasible because they can easily move into the healthcare segment since they're already leading it within telecommunications. Secondly, retail services. The issue here is that there's low growth. But on top of that, there's not as much critical data that they're actually collecting within the retail segment, so we don't see it as a long-term attractive segment to pursue. And lastly, construction. This is something that was brought to us. Very similar to the retail segment, we don't see it as actually growing very rapidly over the next coming years, as it is growing at a rate of 3.2% right now. And on top of that, same as retail, there's not that much critical data that is actually collected. So with that, we are very confident that professional services is really the best way for Bell to move forward, because there's the most critical data that you would be collecting on employees as well as the customers that would be going into these professional services. On top of that, it is actually the most profitable, and this is something that we know that you hold to heart, and it is growing very rapidly. Now let's look into where it would be most attractive to pursue this venture in these professional services. So we really saw that Ontario is really the most attractive. And why is that? Well, it's a tech hub of Canada. So why not go there, right? On top of that, they actually have it has the largest province with the most companies under 200 employees, which is very significant. So it actually has the most small to medium-sized enterprises. On top of that, they actually raised, I believe, $19.2 million in telecommunications over the last year. So it is a leader in telecommunications, as well as a very attractive market for cybersecurity. And lastly, a summary of insights. So why should Bell pursue cybersecurity? So we see that you've led wireline for so long. We see that there's a rise in wireless, and 5G is going to happen so imminently. And really want to make sure that you are the leader and when 5G and the rise of data comes to place. And we've outlined the 4 sectors that will be most impacted by this rise of data, and really saw that professional services were the most attractive because it's growing the most rapidly, and because they're really the segment that will be in need of the cybersecurity service. And lastly, we saw that Ontario, for the time being, is the most attractive as it is the tech hub of Canada, and on top of that, it is the leading province within telecommunications across Canada. And you already have a network there that you can leverage. Now, we were here today to show you that you can do more than connect with people, as you've done so well, and actually support the Canadian economy. And with that, I'll leave it off to my colleague Isabella, who will run you through the implementation.
As we've discussed, this implementation is a great opportunity to support local communities, but it will also be a key driver of profitability going forward. And that is why we were so excited today to present to you our 2022 vision, launching cybersecurity products to targeting SMEs in Ontario, specifically in professional services. And we'll be doing this in 3 key phases, just as my colleague outlined before. First, tailoring those products that we already have targeted to large businesses to the needs of the small and medium enterprises we're targeting now, with the KPI of reaching the new product offering within 8 months, which we believe is fairly conservative considering we already have a lot of infrastructure set in place. Then for the growth phase, we'll be expanding the business market team to support those new services, but also reallocating some staff, as we know we already have a strong team in place. Lastly, during our last phase, we'll be marketing and reaching those new businesses, increasing the awareness to really ensure they know about this new great offering we have in cybersecurity. And we'll be aiming to reach 2,800 small businesses and 215 million businesses by the end of the implementation in 2022. But before we dive into the implementation, let's look at position. You asked us here today to provide a position that would be competitive for you in cybersecurity. And we know that small and medium enterprises are the backbone of the Canadian economy. But sadly, more often than not, small businesses tend to fail because of lack of funding. So we know the importance of providing a reasonable price. But we believe that with the infrastructure we already have in place, we can provide the best quality as well as a reasonable price, using the scale that Bell has to provide them that quality, while also ensuring to adapt, using that scale to adapt to the future needs, and to tailor those products as much as possible to those small and medium businesses. Furthermore, this new initiative fits very well with the strategic imperative the 6 ones we maintained through the last year, particularly when it comes to the operational priority of improving your experience for your clients as well as businesses. And this is what we'd like to keep in mind moving forward. Let's take a look at how we can prioritize this. So in the short term, we can have a lot of high impact, expanding the team, and making sure we're set up to achieve our major products, developing those tailored products in SMEs, which we already have, adapting the current offering. In the long term, we'll go from Ontario to Quebec, using the established service offerings we already have, and achieving that wider implementation that Bell can certainly do, using the wide broadband infrastructure. So with that, let's look into a first phase of tailoring those services to the small medium enterprises. So you suggested to us a few areas within professional services, particularly legal, accounting, and IT services. All 3 of those sectors collect critical information, which means personal information such as credit history and financial reporting, as you can see outlined below. In particular, legal gathers information on contracts, which in businesses tends to be, particularly in B2B, becomes very important. And we've outlined of the current services what we can adapt and what we believe will be best tailored to fit with the needs of those businesses. First, in terms of network security, to avoid redundancies, as this can be very inefficient for small businesses, but also protecting them from many threats incoming so they can continue operating in the future, and anything to do with email security, as we know that's an important form of communication for those small businesses, particularly in rural areas, which will also be targeted as we'll see later on. But we also outlined the need to ensure regulatory compliance, as the regulatory framework within Canada has changed for data privacy over the last few years. So using these 3 main sectors, we've adapted 2 main service offerings to small and medium services. To small businesses, we believe a smaller fee, as well as a variable support fee based on how much data is collected and how much support is required going forward, is the key approach going forward, seeing as those businesses might have difficulties moving forward. We believe that medium-sized businesses can take on a higher price due to the fact that they have larger staff and they take on larger client bases as well. To see as an example, for these small-sized businesses, we know that devices are very important, particularly in those small agricultural sectors in rural areas. So we've outlined that as one of the main needs of those small businesses, as well as restricting access to some particular users in medium-sized businesses. Within our second phase, we're looking to hire a new team. And this will be primarily done within the Bell Business Market Scheme by relocating some of the staff and tailoring the needs of that staff, hiring the right talent. And this will be done primarily within the urban centers. Moving forward, as we already have a strong base to go from. As we discussed before, we're looking to Ontario, but more specifically in the beginning in the urban settings in Toronto and Kingston, where most of the investments are. But going forward, and this is mostly due to the density of how many small medium enterprises are within that region. However, our mission here, and as well as it has been Bell's mission to connect individuals, this is what we strive to maintain going forward. We aim to support rural communities by providing them the same support we provide in urban settings, with a pilot project in the development zones in Ontario, such as Sudbury, for example, which has developed quite a lot recently, especially in the agricultural sector. So this will be really key going forward, supporting those extra communities that we have. Finally, if we take a look at exactly what those small business and enterprises will be going through, they will start by contacting the team and scheduling an appointment. But the key point is that Bell will be with them every step of the way to ensure that they have the maximum amount of support. Kind of like the questions have been supporting you over the last few weeks. And lastly, we wanted to take a look at how to reach those new businesses in 3 different ways. First, in awareness, where we'll be looking at participating in trade shows. Really reach those new businesses, let them know of the service offering you have from now on. And then cross-selling to current businesses which already have Bell services, such as the wireline or wireless services, and approaching those new contacts that have been established through the trade shows. Finally, we want to make sure that we are always in contact with this business, much in tone with providing that service and the support that we want to provide these small businesses that are back home in Canada. We're providing them a dedicated sales team which we hired in the first few phases to really tailor that approach to them and ensure they have as much personalized support as possible. And finally, I'll pass it on to Zach to talk about the stakeholders.
Certainly. So in terms of our strategy, what is the impact at the end of the day for important stakeholders here? So first off, we have the Government of Canada. And as mentioned repeatedly in our presentation, while SMEs are the backbone of Canada, and by providing them a tailored approach to actually protecting their data and protecting the data of their customers, we ensure that these small businesses can continue being successful in the future with the rise of an increasingly digital society and business environment. In terms of Bell, we'll be able to achieve a high penetration, specifically in Ontario, for small and medium enterprises within the professional service sector. Now, in just a moment, we'll pass on to financials, and this might seem like a drop in the bucket in the great scheme of things, but this is a pilot project essentially, because in the end, you'll be able to expand to Quebec, to other maritime provinces, and across Canada. And the scale that you'll reach by doing so will allow you to profit greatly from this new segment that Bell is entering. Finally, for Nicolas Ahmed, who was the writer of the case, we thought he'd be on the panel here today. And so we wanted to address for him that, as mentioned at the start of the presentation, profitability is very important for Bell due to its dividend stock nature. And so by following this approach, we'll ensure you have a profitable new venture in the cybersecurity and SME environment. So looking at the actual timeline here, what does it look like? Well, for the first phase, where you'll be actually redeveloping your current offering to tailor it to small and medium enterprises and recruiting the additional staff, this will be done over the first year. Then, more specifically for the harvest phase, you'll be actually attending trade shows to promote this new service, and you will complete the rural Ontario expansion and the expansion to Quebec over the later part of the implementation. Looking at the actual financials here, I want to first off apologize. It's going to be a bit more a cappella since we were a bit pressed for time at the end, but I assure you that I'll be able to answer most of your questions if needed. And so what does it actually look like? So for Ontario, for small and medium businesses, we'll actually be able to reach $2.8 million in revenue in 2022 and a positive EBITDA or BAIA, as mentioned here, which is bénéfice avant amortissement, intérêt et amortisation. That's not right. That's not right at all. But we uploaded it. Sorry about that. And so you'll have a positive operating margin in 2022. And there's a high potential for you to reach significantly higher margins in the future due to the scale you'll be reaching. There was a significant part of the actual expenses that were fixed expenses, $2.5 million specifically. And so this means you need a lot of scale and a higher penetration for you to be able to profit here. In addition, we'd like to specify that we actually index the fixed cost at 1.5% annually, and we did the same for the actual pricing. So the pricing we used to drive this was $600 per small business, which means 0 to 100 employees. And we actually used a $5,000 annual fee for medium businesses, which are from 100 to 500 employees. And we did this because we saw that there was going to be a lot more data flow and data to protect for the medium businesses than for the small businesses. In addition, we'd just like to indicate how we came to our numbers in terms of target market. So the way we drove the previously seen revenues were from target market, penetration rate, and fee. And so the target market for Ontario for small businesses was considered to be 68,000 on the leftmost column here. And we used the actual data provided in the case, which was from Stat Canada. And so we used the percentages per targeted reporting groups and applied it to the actual number of small businesses within Ontario. A similar approach was used for the medium businesses. And so with this, we achieved the 68,000 small businesses within Ontario and the 1,000 small businesses within Ontario for the medium business segment. So what are the key risks here? First off, it might be difficult to leverage the current offering you have for large enterprises and modify it to actually apply to small businesses. Now, what you might need to do here is actually hire more specific talent that will know about the challenges and risks that these small businesses are facing in terms of cybersecurity. Secondly, in terms of the expansion, there might be a cultural language barrier, specifically thinking of Quebec here. It is the needs of the businesses or the approach they want from the sales team might be different than what they want in Ontario. So we need to make sure that when this expansion actually occurs, you tailor your approach specifically to the Quebecers' needs. Finally, in terms of the buy-in of SMEs in the Ontario market, if it is low after the actual marketing campaign, we'll want to implement additional marketing initiatives and potentially look at new sectors if we don't see a significant buy-in. So we came here to answer 6 questions. Now, I will address the 4 on here, but more specifically wanted to target professional services because we saw there was a lot more growth within the sector, and it did have additional hurdles, such as the presence of TELUS within healthcare and the lower growth in the construction segments. I'll be able to go into more detail in the other ones in the Q&A if needed. And so, while we're here today, we're here to present you an approach to actually entering the cybersecurity market, specifically for SMEs within Canada, first off starting in Ontario. And we propose a strategic approach that will allow you to capitalize on the high need for cybersecurity within these businesses and help you build flourish for many winters to come while supporting communities across Canada. We thank you for your attention and open the floor to questions.
I would like to give you the opportunity to go back on your slide with the 6 items where you were answering questions. If you can take a minute on that, please.
So the actual flexible pricing tailored for business needs, which initially mentioned during the implementation. So we think this is very important because a price range of 400 to 1,000, which we were initially suggested, doesn't seem appropriate for these significantly larger businesses from 100 to 500 employees. We don't think it makes sense to charge them the same amount as the very small businesses that can have from 0 to 100 employees. In addition to considering they have a significantly higher amount of data than the small businesses. In terms of positioning developed for best quality for affordable price, well, we think that this goes without saying because Bell has so much more scale than any other company that can offer this kind of services in Canada. And they already have a very high quality product since they already offer it to large enterprises. And so they can convert it for a small cost and offer it to communities across Canada, starting in Ontario. Finally, for the adaptation strategy to Quebec, well, we believe you should leverage your staff and employees within Quebec who are already well familiar with the market and have the additional skills needed to succeed here. I don't know if you would like to address.
No, you did perfect.
So I noticed in your deployment plan and timelines, you had a year 1 Ontario rural expansion and you're hiring in year 0. So how do you keep your new hires occupied if you're only expanding in year 1, right? So we know that we have to make sure that these agents are trained and then occupied. So how do you manage to keep them occupied to ensure that you have the
Profitability?
thank you, profitability for your agents, right? Or your representatives.
Yes. So the employees that we'll be hiring in the first year are mainly focused on sales. So their biggest focus, especially when it comes to those remote communities, will be first awareness, and will be then expanding into the actual implementation of the cybersecurity services later on at later stages. So the main focus on how we keep them occupied in the first year is really that sales approach that encourage those businesses to come to Bell to make sure we're first top of mind when they consider a company to get involved for cybersecurity.
Thank you.
Well, piggyback on that, you said that you want to hire like 10-person in IT. I guess there are cyber folks. This is where we got them. This is the part where I forgot a little bit because this is where we have a bit higher turnover of cyber folks, but also where we have also time to fill is kind of double of any else position. So how are you going to do that to first attract them, but also retain them?
So yeah, I actually already have a very large cybersecurity team that's offering these services to large enterprises. And so the approach we'll be using is to actually transfer some of these employees that are very successful within the large enterprise team and transfer them to the small team, the small enterprise team to actually help them grow this business, recruit other people, and ensure that they can offer the specific skills to this team in terms of cybersecurity knowledge. The bulk of the team will actually be building salespeople to go reach the businesses.
I'll continue on that actually. Like you were talking about cross-sell. I would like to get more in details on how will you do it.
When we refer to cross-selling, the way we picture getting into the consideration phase with consumers that we already have Bell products is we use that sales team and reinforce it, and the reinforcements that the sales team will be having to target those new consumers and let them know about those new services they can get through Bell as well. So this could be done through direct contact and through cold calling or emails, as those are frequently used for small businesses, particularly in the rural areas. So that's how we can actually do cross-selling. So getting those consumers that already have the wireline and wireless services, getting them to know and to buy into the new cybersecurity space, which with the company they are interested.
In your assessment of the different sectors, you pick professional services, healthcare, retail services have a good rating as well. Would we consider expanding to those in Ontario as well, or Quebec?
Yeah, definitely. So we looked into what is really the need right now. So we know that professional services are actually the ones that are looking into providing to protecting this data the most right now, because they have employees as well as customers right now to protect. Retail would be the second most attractive market in the future, because retail are not necessarily in the need right now, but we know that after 5G is implemented, they'll have a lot more data, and thus they'll have a lot more need for cybersecurity. So with that being said, retail will be the second sector we enter. And as the risk was mentioned in our risk mitigation, if we see that there's a low buy-in from SMEs within the Ontario market,
The period has come to an end.
yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, good job. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.